Hey everyone, I am Joanne Bethay here with the Clemson Insider. As you have probably seen, we have this awesome new studio that the student members have also get to create their own shows. Well, today on Tuesday, I get to create the very first episode of my show titled Cup of Joe. Well, my very first guest is Will Vandervoort, which I'm sure if you follow Clemson Insider, you've heard of this guy. He is the senior writer and is a big help to all of us. How you doing, Will?
Doing good, Joanne. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad you're here. Now, to jump into our first topic, Will, is strength of schedule, which is always, a big topic that people talk about before college football starts. Well, two very tough competitors, Clemson and Alabama, have been ranked by multiple articles to have some of the weakest schedules. By way too early polls, as of right now, Clemson is only playing two top 25 teams, and only one of those is on the road. And by other way too early polls, Alabama, as of right now, is only playing three top 25 teams, and two of those are on the road. Now, my question for you, Will, is it fair to say that these two teams have weak schedules?
Yeah, I think it is because, first of all, it's Clemson and Alabama, first of all, and they're the two most dominant teams in college football. And when I look at Clemson's schedule, a lot of people say Clemson's playing a weak schedule, but then I look at it and really is it? Because if Clemson played this schedule, if somebody else in the ACC played Clemson's schedule, everybody would be talking about how difficult that schedule is for that team. I think a lot of the problem is that Clemson is so good and they're so talented. And so Clemson dominates everybody. Like last year, they won 13 of their 15 games by 20 points or more. Mm-hmm. And then their last 10 consecutive games, including the big 28-point win over Alabama in the national championship game. And so Clemson is so good, and they just roll over their opponents. It makes their opponents look like they're not good. But what we found out, when you look at how some of the ACC teams did in bowl games, how they did it in non-conference games, they held their own pretty well. Mm-hmm. It just shows Clemson is far above the rest of the conference. And I think the same is for Alabama, because Alabama, everybody talks about how tough the SEC is, but Alabama dominated the SEC last year like no one ever has before. They won all 8 of their regular season games by 22 or more points. They won by an average of 31 or 32 points a game in their SEC games last year. The only tough game they played within the conference was in the SEC championship game when they came back to beat Georgia. Other than that, nobody came close to beating Alabama last year. Now, so does that mean the SEC's weak? Well, if you listen to some of the that four-letter network, they would say, no, the SEC is the greatest conference that's ever existed. So I think it's just more or less Clemson is just really, really good and way more talented than anybody in the ACC, and Alabama is just really, really good and way more talented than anybody in the SEC, and that's just the way it is. But if you put, say, Duke playing Texas A&M mm-hmm. on their schedule and playing South Carolina on their non-conference schedule, I'd be talking about how tough of a non-conference schedule Duke has. Clemson plays Texas A&M. That's a tough game. They got to go to Syracuse. You look at the first 3 weeks of Clemson's season, Georgia Tech, which Clemson knows nothing about because they got a brand new coaching staff. Mm-hmm. So they're kind of going into that game blind as they try to adjust to what Georgia Tech's going to do. So Georgia Tech has a little advantage. I think Clemson should win the game, obviously, but that's not an easy game as people think. And then they host Texas A&M, who is going to be much better this year. Jimbo Fisher's second year. People forget this is a Texas A&M team that came within 2 points of tying Clemson in the last seconds last year at Kyle Field. Was probably, you could say, the toughest game Clemson played last year.
And I think you have to give it to Clemson that they have always tried to have a tough competitor outside of the conference.
Absolutely.
And that's another thing you have to think about is that these schedules are made, so far in advance. How can you know, 5 years ago or 10 years ago how your ACC opponents are? And you have to play, everybody on your side of the conference, so you have to give it to Clemson that they have tried to go outside of the conference, mm-hmm. And pick tough competitors.
Well, Dabo did that when he first got the job. He went to Terry Don Phillips, the AD at the time, and said, look, we need to play tougher non-conference opponents because mm-hmm. if we expect to beat teams and to get to the level we want to get to this program, we got to know how to play these teams and beat these teams. And so that's exactly why they went that direction. So as I mentioned, Clemson's first 3 games, they go to Syracuse that third game. That's a tough one, too. Remember, they lost there 2 years ago. Syracuse is the last ACC team to beat Clemson and the only ACC team in the last 3 years of the regular season.
And they are, by many preseason polls, to be in the top 25.
They are. So that's pretty tough to me to start off a season, those 3 games.
Mm-hmm. Now, my second question for you about the strength of schedules is since the college football playoff has started, Alabama or Clemson has been one of the 4 teams selected. So what does it say about the selection committee that a team that, so say, has a weaker schedule can still be selected?
Well, I think the selection committee, first of all, looks at the non-conference, who they're playing outside. I think Clemson playing Texas A&M always helps them because when they do go through the ACC, they're able to say, hey, look, not only we dominated this conference, but we beat a team in what's so-called the toughest conference as well. And I think that helps. Alabama's always played that neutral site game against a Big Ten or Pac-12 or ACC team that I think generally always helps them. Plus, they play in the SEC, and that gives them a little bit of edge there as well. So, and then you just look at what those 2 teams have done in the past, and I think people look at Dabo Swinney and Nick Saban and what they've built, those 2 programs, and so they get the benefit of the doubt a lot in the selection committee. Not to say that's the reason they should get in, but it does help.
Yeah.
The past does help what they've done, and so, you know, Clemson's going to start the year possibly number 1, number 2 in the country, Alabama the same way, and as long as they just take care of business in front of them on their schedule, they're going to be sitting there 1 and 2 at the end, and pretty much are going to be the top 2 choices for the selection committee, and then it's just like who's 3 and 4.
Yeah. So I think when you have built such a program, it's not necessarily what your schedule has, but what you do with your schedule, you know, like you said. So the next thing on our list of topics is Terry Bowden, who has recently joined Clemson's staff as a unpaid intern. He is 63, you know, has been a head coach at programs such as Auburn, Akron, Samford. So what do you think at such a age that you can still learn from Clemson football?
Well, I don't know so much he's learning from Clemson football because he's coming because, first of all, he loves the game of football. But I think what Terry wants to do, and I haven't talked to him yet, but just looking at his background and some things I've read and what he said was he's kind of interested in becoming, I think, some kind of athletic administrator in some way. And so to do that, he's got to have that degree in athletic administration. So, you know, one of the most, you know, organized people is Dabo Swinney, and you can come in, you can help coach the football team or be a member of the staff of this program. And so he can, you know, kind of do that and then learn behind Woody McCorvey, who is a guy who's a former coach, longtime coach, came in with Dabo and became an administrator and is one of the best. And so, you know, he can kind of get that knowledge from him and kind of in his later years of life, because I know Terry Bowden loves being around football, but he doesn't want to coach anymore, I don't think, either, as a head coach. But he wants to be around it, and one way to be around it is to be some kind of administrator. And so I can see that this is some kind of role of why he's going down this road and what he ultimately wants to do, which is kind of, you know, do what guys like Woody McCorvey and Brad Scott and those guys do on the Clemson staff.
I think that just speaks so highly of Dabo, though, that somebody who has such a significant resume and at that age of 63 is willing to be an unpaid intern.
Yeah, well, let's keep in mind, because you mentioned those other schools he's coached at, that Terry's probably done well taking care of his finances. So I'm sure he's in a state where he's not really worried about the money.
But to like step down and not be a leader anymore, you know, because he's going to be the one following now, not the one leading.
Yeah, but I can imagine in certain situations you got another former head coach who coached at the highest level on the staff. It's another guy Dabo can lean on from experiences and stuff. And so, you know, so it's not like he's going to go in there and be like me or you, and, you know, he's going to be the low guy.
Oh, you're not saying I wouldn't be a good football coach?
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying you're young and you would be the low man on the totem pole. And
you got to work your way up.
Yeah, I don't think he's in a situation where he's trying to work his way up. I think he's in a situation where he's just trying to get his master's, it sounds like, and so he can go ahead and be an administrator of some sort. So I think that's more it than anything. And then probably just, you know, wants to see how Dabo does it. You know, let's keep in mind the Bowdens and Dabo Swinney have a long-standing relationship that goes back to when Dabo was a player for his brother Tommy at Alabama, and then also the fact that, you know, Dabo worked for Tommy and is good friends with Bobby, his dad, the legendary coach at Florida State. So, you know, I think it all kind of goes hand in hand together, and I think, you know, I'm interested to see when we get the opportunity to talk to Terry what the story is and how it all transpired. But it's definitely fascinating, and I think it's a good addition to the Clemson staff.
Well, thank you, Will, for joining me and for all your
Thanks.
opinions.
Thanks for
and
having me.
look for the next episode of Cup of Joe.